My name is Naomi Ferris. I was 26 when I finally understood the difference between being loved and being tolerated. The dinner table in my parents' house had a particular sound, the clink of my mother's good silverware, reserved only for nights when my brother had news. That night, the silverware was out before he'd even said a word. Yale called, my father said, setting down his glass like it was a gavel. Full scholarship. Graduate program. My mother's hands went to her mouth. My brother, Elliot, tried to look humble, the way people do when they already know they've won. I sat there with a forkful of rice halfway to my mouth, waiting for someone to ask about the promotion I'd gotten 3 weeks earlier. Nobody did. I hadn't expected them to, not really, and that was the saddest part. I'd stopped expecting a long time ago. You must be so proud of him, my aunt said to my mother on the phone later, loud enough for the whole kitchen to hear. He's the one who actually made something of himself, my mother replied. I stood in the hallway with a stack of folded towels in my arms, listening the way you listen to weather reports about a storm that's already inside your house. He's the one, not one of them. Not both my children, the one. I want to tell you I stormed off dramatically. I didn't. I finished folding the towels. I put them in the closet where they belonged, corners matched, the way my mother liked. Then I went to my apartment across town and sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, not crying, just quiet, running my thumb along the seam of my work bag like it was the only steady thing in the room. I'd heard the phrase family disappointment applied to me since I was 14, not shouted, never shouted, just said the way you'd mention the weather. Naomi's not really the academic type. Naomi takes after her father's side, more practical, small sentences, dropped so often they became architecture. I built my whole understanding of myself around the doorframes of other people's disappointment. Elliot wasn't cruel. That's the strange part people never expect in stories like this. He never once said a mean word to me. He didn't have to. The house did it for him. Quietly, at every dinner, in every framed photo on the mantel where his debate trophy sat gold and gleaming and my community college diploma sat somewhere in a drawer, uncelebrated, folded like the towels. That night, I opened my laptop and looked at the offer letter for my new position, Director of Operations, a title I'd worked 11 years for, starting as a receptionist who filed other people's expense reports. I read it twice. Then I closed the laptop and lay back on my pillow, staring at the ceiling, feeling something shift very quietly inside my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Just a small, cold clarity, like a window opening in a room that had been sealed shut for years. I didn't know it then, but that was the night everything started to change, not because I decided to fight back, but because I finally let myself notice the door. I was 8 when I first understood that love in our house came with conditions attached like invisible strings. I remember a rainy Tuesday, kneeling on the carpet with a shoebox of pressed flowers I'd been collecting all spring, violets, a maple leaf, a sprig of lavender from Mrs. Kowalski's garden 2 doors down. I'd arranged them so carefully, labeled each one in careful child handwriting, and brought the box to my mother expecting, I don't know what. Delight, maybe. How lovely. She looked at it for exactly 3 seconds. That's nice, sweetie. Elliot got an A on his science project. Come see. I put the shoebox under my bed. It stayed there for years, forgotten, the flowers turning to dust and paper. That's the story of my childhood in miniature. Not one dramatic betrayal, but 1,000 small redirections, each one so minor it seemed unreasonable to be hurt by it. Who gets hurt over a shoebox of flowers? And yet the hurt accumulates, the way water shapes stone, patient and invisible until one day you realize the whole landscape has changed. There were exceptions. My father, in his quieter moments, would sometimes drive me to the library on Saturday mornings, just the 2 of us, and let me pick out as many books as I wanted. He never said much on those drives, but he'd hum along to the radio, and once, just once, he told me I had a good head for numbers, and I held on to that sentence for years like a coin I kept in my pocket, rubbing the edges smooth with memory. Elliot was 3 years younger, and from the moment he could talk, he had a gift for saying the right thing to the right person. Teachers loved him. Relatives loved him. He wasn't manipulative, exactly. I want to be fair to him in this telling. He was simply skilled at being loved in a way I never learned to be. I left for community college because a 4-year university felt financially impossible and no one offered to help make it possible. Elliot got tutors. I got a part-time job at a hardware store and taught myself accounting from library books, the same ones my father used to drive me to on Saturdays. I remember calling home during my second year, excited, to tell them I'd made the dean's list. My mother's response was, "Oh, that's good. Did you hear Elliot got into the debate regionals?" I sat on my dorm room floor after that call, phone still warm in my hand, and I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because there was nothing else left to do with the feeling. It was almost impressive, I thought, how consistent they were. At least I could rely on the pattern. At least the disappointment was reliable. I didn't hate them. That's important to understand. I loved my parents with a stubborn, aching loyalty children give even to imperfect homes. I just learned, slowly, to stop setting my shoebox of flowers on the table. I learned to keep my small joys quiet, private, mine. I didn't know then that keeping things quiet wasn't the same as making peace with them. I was only storing them away, the way you store away flowers under a bed. Not gone, just waiting. There's a box in my closet, cardboard, unlabeled, that holds 17 years of letters I wrote and never mailed. The first one was written when I was 15, addressed to my mother, though I never called it a letter. I called it notes, as if pretending it was casual would make the ache in it smaller. I wrote about the shoebox of flowers. I wrote about wanting, just once, to be looked at the way she looked at Elliot's report cards. I never sent it. I folded it into a paperback book and forgot about it for a decade. The habit stuck, though. Every time something happened that I couldn't say out loud, I wrote it down instead. A private ledger of moments too small to justify a confrontation, but too heavy to simply forget. My therapist, years later, would call this emotional archiving. I called it survival. The night of the Yale dinner, I went home and added to the box for the first time in almost 2 years. I wrote about the silverware. I wrote about the phone call to my aunt. I wrote, in small, careful handwriting that hadn't changed since I was a teenager. I don't think they know how to see me. I don't think they ever will. Then I did something I hadn't done before. I read through the whole box, start to finish, spreading the pages across my apartment floor like a map of a country I'd been living in without ever looking at directly. What struck me wasn't the pain. I'd expected the pain. What struck me was the pattern. Reading them together, in order, I could see it the way you see a photograph developing in a darkroom. Image emerging slowly from nothing. Every letter was written the same week as some quiet dismissal, and every dismissal was followed, a few weeks later, by me working harder, achieving more, as if trying to earn something that was never going to be given on merit. I sat on the floor with all those pages around me and felt something I hadn't expected. Not sadness, but a strange, clarifying anger, quiet as a candle flame. Not at my parents exactly. At the version of myself who kept trying to win a game that was never fair. I didn't decide that night to seek revenge, and I want to be honest about that because this isn't really a story about revenge. It's a story about a woman deciding, slowly and without cruelty, to stop asking a locked door to open. I put the letters back in the box, but I kept one out, the first one, the 15-year-old's shaky handwriting. I put it in my desk drawer at work, where I could see it sometimes. A reminder of the girl who used to fold her joy away like laundry, waiting for someone else's permission to feel proud of herself. I didn't know yet what I would do. I only knew that something in me had finally stopped waiting. 3 weeks after the Yale dinner, my father asked me to lunch, just the two of us, which almost never happened. We sat at a diner we used to visit on those Saturday library mornings, decades ago. The vinyl booths cracked now in different places than I remembered. He ordered black coffee. I ordered tea. For a while we talked about nothing, his knees, the weather, a neighbor's dog that kept getting into the trash. Then, without looking at me, he said, "Your mother doesn't mean anything by it, you know. The way she is about your brother." I didn't say anything. I'd learned over the years that silence sometimes drew more truth out of people than questions did. She grew up with a brother everyone favored, he continued. I think she doesn't even notice she's doing the same thing. He turned his coffee cup slowly on its saucer, a nervous habit I recognized from my own hands. I should have said something years ago. I didn't. I don't have a good reason why. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever received from either of them, and it came sideways, wrapped in explanation instead of ownership, the way most difficult truths in our family arrived, never head-on, always at an angle, as if directness might shatter something. I asked him quietly, "Did you notice? The shoebox of flowers. The letters I got into things. Any of it?" His hands went still on the cup. "I noticed," he said. "I told myself you were strong enough not to need it pointed out. I think that was easier for me than admitting I hadn't done enough." I felt something loosen in my chest, not healed exactly, but no longer as tightly wound. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, not yet. But it was the first time someone in my family had looked directly at the pattern instead of around it. "I'm not asking you to fix it," I told him. "I just needed you to see it." He nodded, and for a moment his eyes were wet in a way I'd never seen before, not once in 26 years. "I see it," he said. "I see you, Naomi." I should have said that a long time ago. We didn't hug. We weren't a family built for that kind of gesture. But he paid for lunch, and as we stood to leave, he put his hand briefly on my shoulder, the same gesture he used to make when I was a girl climbing into the car after the library, books stacked on my lap like treasure. It wasn't everything, but it was something true, finally spoken instead of folded away. And I realized, walking to my car afterward, that I didn't need my mother's whole transformation to feel like my own life was worth something. I only needed to stop measuring myself by a scale that had never been calibrated fairly in the first place. My mother called me 2 weeks later and asked to meet for coffee, not a family dinner, not a group setting, just her and me, which was rarer still than lunch with my father. I almost said no. Some old, tired part of me expected another dinner table moment dressed up as intimacy. But I went because the girl who used to hide her shoebox under the bed deserved, I thought, to at least give her mother the chance to do better. She looked smaller across the table than she did at home, stirring her coffee long after the sugar had dissolved. "Your father told me about your lunch," she said. "About the flowers. I didn't remember it the way you did." "I know," I said, gently, not to wound her, just to be honest. "I remember being proud of you," she said, more than I ever said out loud. I don't know why I never said it. She looked up at me, and there was something unguarded in her face I hadn't seen since I was very young. "I think I was afraid that if I made too much of your successes, Elliot would feel less loved. And somewhere in trying not to tip the scale, I think I just never put anything on your side of it at all." I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't, not entirely, and I'd promised myself in that box of unsent letters that I would stop performing forgiveness I didn't yet feel. But I also didn't perform anger. I simply said, "I needed you to see me as clearly as you saw him. I still do." "I'm trying," she said. "I know that's not the same as having done it already." We sat there a while longer, not solving everything. Some things aren't solved in a single coffee, no matter how badly a story wants them to be. But something had shifted. Not a door thrown wide open. A window, cracked, letting in air that hadn't been there before. Before we left, she reached into her bag and took out a small pressed flower, a violet, brittle with age, tucked inside a plastic sleeve. "I found this in a book of your father's," she said. "In the library. I think it was yours." I stared at it, a single flower from that long-lost shoebox, somehow preserved, somehow surviving 18 years of quiet. I didn't cry, though I wanted to. I simply held it, feeling its impossible fragility between my fingers, and understood that some things we think are lost are only ever misplaced, waiting for someone to notice them again. "Thank you," I said. And I meant it more than I expected to. Elliot's send-off party came at the end of that summer, a modest gathering in the backyard, string lights, a cake with a small blue Y iced onto it. I almost didn't go. Some part of me still braced for the old choreography, the toasts, the pride, the silverware. But I went because avoiding my brother's happiness had never been the point. My grievance was never with Elliot succeeding. It was with the frame my parents had built around success, one that had only ever had room for one child inside it. Elliot found me by the drink table, looking uncharacteristically nervous for someone about to attend Yale. "Can I talk to you a second?" he asked. We stood near the fence, away from the noise. "Mom told me about your talk with her," he said. "And Dad told me about lunch." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't know it was like that for you. I mean, I think some part of me did. I just never let myself really look at it because it was easier to enjoy being the favorite than to ask why." It was the most honest thing my brother had ever said to me. "I'm not trying to take anything from your night," I told him. "You worked hard. You deserve this." "I know," he said. "But I also think I owe you an apology I never gave for letting you carry something I benefited from." He paused. "I don't know how to fix 18 years. But I don't want another 18 to go by with you thinking I didn't notice." We stood there for a moment, the string lights swaying gently above us, the cake with its small blue eye glowing under the porch light like something quietly sacred. I didn't need him to give up his moment. I only needed him to stop pretending the imbalance had never existed. Later that night, my mother stood up with a small glass of sparkling cider and, before toasting Elliot, said something that made the whole yard go quiet for half a second. She raised her glass to me too, and said, "And to Naomi, whose strength this family has leaned on more than we ever admitted." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a grand reversal. But it was true, and it was said out loud in front of people for the first time in my life. I smiled. Not the practice smile I used to wear at family dinners, but something quieter and more real. I thought of the pressed violet sitting now in a small frame on my apartment windowsill, and I understood, standing there under the string lights, that healing rarely announces itself with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives exactly like this, a sentence, finally spoken, landing somewhere it had always belonged. In the weeks after Elliot left for Connecticut, I found myself returning less to the box of unsent letters. Not because everything was resolved, some wounds don't fully close, they only stop being the center of the room, but because I no longer needed the ledger the way I once had. I took the box down from my closet one Sunday afternoon and read through it one final time. 17 years of quiet grief, all in my own handwriting, chronicling a girl who kept trying to prove she deserved a kind of love that should never have required proving. I didn't burn them, though the story in my head sometimes wanted a dramatic gesture like that. Instead, I did something smaller and, I think, more honest. I wrote one final letter, addressed to myself at 15, the girl who folded her flowers away under the bed. "You were never the disappointment," I wrote. "You were just standing in a house that hadn't learned yet how to see you. It wasn't your fault, and it was never going to be fixed by trying harder. I'm sorry it took this long for anyone, including me, to say that clearly." I placed that letter on top of the others and closed the box. Not as an ending exactly, but as a kind of quiet ceremony, the closing of an account that no longer needed constant tending. My relationship with my parents didn't transform overnight into something without complication. My mother still sometimes slipped into old patterns, praising Elliot's calls from Yale a little too readily, and I still felt the old flinch when she did. But something had changed underneath it. I no longer needed her praise to know my own worth. The promotion I'd earned, the 11 years of quiet, unglamorous work, the woman I'd built myself into without anyone's applause, none of that required her validation to be real. I called my father sometimes on Saturday mornings now, an echo of those old library drives, and we talked about nothing in particular, the way we used to. It was enough. It didn't erase the years before it, but it didn't need to. Some things exist alongside the past instead of replacing it. I kept the pressed violet on my windowsill, where the morning light caught it just right, and some mornings I'd look at it while drinking my coffee and think about how strange it was that something so small and fragile had managed to survive so long in the dark, waiting only to be found again. A year later, I stood at my own kitchen window in a new apartment, the one I'd bought with the promotion I'd once feared no one would ever celebrate. The violet sat framed on the sill, its color long faded to a papery brown, but I'd never once thought to throw it away. Some things earn their place simply by having survived. My mother visits now, sometimes on Sunday afternoons. She never mentions Elliot's achievements without also asking, genuinely, about mine, a small correction, imperfect but real. My father still hums along to the radio in the car, and last spring, driving me home from a work event, he told me he was proud of me, plainly, without qualification, the way he should have said it 20 years earlier. I let myself hear it fully this time, without flinching, without waiting for a second half of the sentence that took it back. I think often about that dinner with the good silverware, the one that started all of this, not with bitterness anymore, but with something closer to understanding. I don't believe my parents set out to make me feel invisible. I believe, like most human failures, it grew quietly out of habits no one examined closely enough, out of a family's old wounds passed down like heirlooms nobody chose to inherit. I never got a dramatic reckoning. There was no single confrontation, no grand unraveling, no scene where everyone finally understood everything at once. There was only a slow accumulation of honest moments, a lunch, a coffee, a toast under string lights, a pressed flower rescued from a forgotten book, small and quiet, the way real change usually is. Some nights, I take the box of letters down from the closet, not to relive the pain, but to remember the girl who kept writing anyway, who kept believing, somewhere underneath all that quiet disappointment, that she was worth being seen. She was right. It just took the rest of us a while to catch up to her. I turned off the kitchen light, the violet a small dark shape against the glass, and walked toward the rest of my life, not healed of everything, but no longer waiting for permission to feel whole.